It's been nearly 7 years since infamous mob boss James Whitey Bulger was captured out in California, ending 16 years on the run that many thought would never end. 2 years later, Bulger was sentenced to 2 life sentences for his crimes, including involvement in 11 murders, extortion, and racketeering. For most, that was case closed, the final chapter of Bulger's decades-long saga. But for Janet Uhlar, one of the jurors who helped put him behind bars, the case is far from settled. Almost immediately after the final gavel, Uhlar became an outspoken critic about how the trial was handled, soon started trading letters with Bulger and his girlfriend, Catherine Gregg. Uhlar has since visited both in prison and written a book, a work of fiction of sorts. It's called The Truth Be Damned, loosely based on the events of the trial and its aftermath. Janet joins me now. It's nice to meet you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
I've read you say you regret voting guilty. You should have held out for a not guilty or a hung jury. Why, Janet?
I believe that a lot of things were kept from the jury, and we're supposed to base our decision on fact, and I don't think we got a lot of the fact.
Like what, for example?
The Jeremiah O'Sullivan story and the immunity, or the fact that...
U.S. Attorney's Office.
Yes, or the fact that Jim Bulger wanted to plead guilty and accept whatever sentencing they would give him without appeal.
Including death, theoretically, if they were took care of, or at least were kinder to his to his girlfriend. So, just to be clear, knowing what you now know, if the case were being heard now, if that had been heard in the courtroom, you would have voted not guilty in this case?
I might have held out for a hung jury nullification because I feel, well, let's start with the opening statement by his own attorney, Jay Carney, saying that his client was guilty of most of the crimes. And from that moment on, I realized we were there more for maybe beyond Bulger's criminal activity.
But he was the one who was on trial. I mean, so... Again, even you're convinced he was participated, if not did these actual murders, right?
Oh, yes, I did.
But you could have voted not guilty despite that fact?
I don't think it was a fair trial, and we all deserve a fair trial.
Is it fair to compare this to your sort of, it's the second time I mentioned O.J. in the same show, where almost everybody on the jury thought, at least those who have spoken, thought he was technically guilty, but that the government, the cops in that case, in this case the FBI, was more, and the U.S. Attorney's was more guilty than the defendant himself. Is that sort of where you are?
I think, yeah, that's where I am. And also taking into account that the key witnesses for the U.S. Attorney's Office, you couldn't believe their testimonies. They were given such outrageous, immoral deals.
You mean like Materano, 20 murders, 12 years only?
For whatever they said about Bulger, they got the deal.
But that's a pretty common thing, as you know, is to basically trade somebody, give them a lighter sentence for testimony against the top dog, which is what they did in this case.
Who says Bulger was the top dog? When you consider those 4 witnesses and then also add Pat Nee into that mix, you've got well more than 50 murders. So how does that balance out in the scales of justice?
Were those issues raised in the jury room by you or others, the concern about the quality or credibility of those killers?
Yeah, we were about divided. About half of us did not even want to consider the testimony of the key witnesses unless there was something else to back up what they said.
And does that mean that some of you said half, were toying at least with a not guilty verdict here, or no?
Not proven, and for the Debbie Davis one, we did come up with we couldn't agree on that one. And a lot of the way the RICO charges were presented to us and how we had to deliberate on them was guilt by association.
You're a nurse in real life, so you understand stress. How stressful was it being on the highest profile case in America?
It was very stressful. Mainly the stress for me was some of the outrageousness of what was happening within the courtroom.
How stressful is it to now be saying, sort of in your book, but also through your own voice, that I would have probably voted for jury nullification or not guilty? How stressful is that when there is a world of survivors out there that think this is the single most murderous, deceitful man who's ever walked the planet?
Why do we think that? Because of the stories of the key witnesses.
You don't believe it?
I don't necessarily believe it.
What
no.
do you not believe about the worst of Jim Bulger?
Oh, I believe Jim Bulger's a criminal. He tells me that many times in our correspondence. There's no denying that.
Well, what don't you believe?
Is he the monster that they've painted him out to be? Is he worse of a monster than John Martirano or Steve Fleming?
So let me be clear, because I don't want to put word. It's not that he's not a monster. You're suggesting some may be worse.
Some may be worse.
How did this pen pal thing and visit start?
I knew that what we saw in the courtroom wasn't all of the truth, and I knew that there was a story behind the story. When you consider that everything we know about Bulger has come through those key witnesses who never thought Bulger would be caught in the first place, how can we believe their stories?
So why didn't he testify if he wanted the real story out?
Yeah, you have to ask him that.
Have you ever asked him?
I've never asked him that, no.
And do you find it as odd as many of us, myself included, I hate when people talk about other people, that a juror in this case would develop, is it fair to say, almost a friendship with a guy who's a convicted serial murderer? Do you find it odd? Or?
There's a bit of a friendship, but what you have to understand too, Jim, is that his story goes beyond even the FBI. It goes into the CIA. He was part of the MK Ultra testing, and they, according to the Senate hearings, LSD testing, according to Senate hearings, were trying to see if they could make people homicidal. He was only 26 when that was done to him.
What's the end game here? I mean, I think most people who know you, some of whom I've spoken to, think you have a sincere interest in getting to the truth, which you think was not fully exposed to the public. But is there an end game? Is it just to get facts out? Where do you want to end up when this is all over?
The end game is, and the question is this: why were the combined crimes of a Martirano, a Fleming, a Weeks, a Pat Nee, and a John Morris not considered as bad as Jim Bulger's? He's in prison for more than the fact that he was a criminal.
And what do you think the answer to your own question is?
I think that we have to go back and investigate the DOJ in Massachusetts, the FBI in Massachusetts. It goes back to Barbosa in the 60s. It goes back. And we have to figure out what went wrong and see how we can fix that.
Janet Uhlar, it's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
The book again is The Truth Be Damned.